Hey guys, Hawkwood here. So I am back from Japan. I haven't played in a few months, but I finally decided to play locals last night. I went undefeated, but of course it's just locals, so there's nothing to really say about that. But a lot of people asked me in my last video for deck lists and stuff like that. So today's video, I'm going to show my deck list and also talk about a lot of the secret effects and things you should remember when playing White Forest and or playing against White Forest. So without further ado, let's just quickly go over the deck list. Pretty standard stuff for the White Forest. I'm playing 3 Silvy, the main starter, 3 Elzette, the next best starter. We have Elzette Azamina, part of the combo. A Stellar of the White Forest. This is a secondary starter that you can also use. It's less good than the other one, so you don't want to play multiple. Also, it recycles itself, which is nice, so you don't have to play more. And then one of each of the Diabell monsters. Diabellstar the Black Witch, Diabellstar Vengeance, and Diabell's the White Witch. So that rounds out the White Forest monsters. Importantly, I'm also playing 3 copies of the field spell. You should always be playing 3 copies of the field spell because the deck doesn't have enough starters without it, and this helps you get that amount of starters that you want. Rounding out the rest of the Sinful Spoils stuff, we have the 3 Wanted, 1 Deception, 1 Hollowed Azamina. This is a pretty standard lineup for ratio, but of course you can play multiple Deceptions as well if you want to open it. It's sometimes a really nice card to have because if it gets ashed, then you can also use it as a spell card to send, which is nice. For the rest of the White Forest stuff, we of course have the 1 Tails, the 1 Sinful Spoils of the White Forest, this is the fusion, the 1 Sinful Slumber Morrian, a secondary Sinful Spoils target, and also a trap card, both of which are very important things to note. The Filia Diabell and the Curse of Diabell will round out the rest of the White Forest engine. And of course, honorary mentions, I'm also playing 2 copies of Foolish Burial Goods, which is of course part of the engine in a way, but it can be non-engine as well. But for my deck, it is exclusively engine. So Foolish Burial Goods, for those of you who are still not aware, you can use it to send Curse of Diabell. When Curse of Diabell is sent to the graveyard, it can add Filia Diabell to your hand. Filia Diabell can search Diabell's the White Witch. You can summon the Diabell's the White Witch by pitching any of your other spell and trap cards, and then that will dump a Sinful Spoils card or Diabell card from your deck to the graveyard. And Diabellstar Vengeance is always treated as a Sinful Spoils card, so you can dump Vengeance to the graveyard and then you can summon it back from the graveyard. So this is technically 1 card combo for this engine specifically, which of course, for those of you who have played the deck for a bit, know that the Vengeance plus White Witch are the most important cards to actually resolve in your combo. They are the bread and butter of this deck. So the reason why I called this card engine is because I'm actually not playing the common card with Foolish Burial Goods, which is the Black Goat Laughs, which is also why I'm only playing 2 of this card and not 3, because I don't want to brick on it. And this card pretty much only ever sends Curse of Diabell. However, if I already have access to the White Witch and Vengeance, and I don't need to send Curse of Diabell, then it can also send Sinful Spoils of Slumber Morrian, which can reset itself from the graveyard as an additional interruption. Obviously, it's not as good as Black Goat Laughs, however, it is an additional interruption that is in engine that I would already be playing, so I don't have to run additional bricks, quote unquote. And also, I don't have to accidentally brick myself by drawing multiples of Foolish Burial Goods, because it is unfortunately a soft once per turn. That is it for the engine. I think the only minor change that I may make is swapping out 1 Foolish Burial Goods with a Terraforming. And the reason for that is because, first of all, if you don't play multiple Foolish Burial Goods, then you can't draw into it. But the other thing too is if you look at the number of starters, we have our 6 main starters here. We have a Stellar, which is our 7th starter, and the 3 Field Spell, which is 10 starters. If you recall in my last mathematics-based video, I told you that the amount of starters to normal summons that we're trying to aim for in a mathematically sound 40 card deck, which by the way, this deck is 40 cards, is to have 4 to 5 starters with 4 to 5 normal summons with 11 to 12 starters. So if you look at this, I have 4 normal summons with 3 Silby and 1 Stellar, so that is the correct number of normal summons. However, I have only 10 real starters, and of course, like I talked about just then, Foolish Burial Goods is a pseudo starter because it gets you to White Witch and Vengeance, which is like the main bread and butter of this deck, so it can technically be considered a starter. However, if you want to get real technical, it's not a true starter, and Terraforming would make it a true 11th starter. So that is the only change I think I would make, and there's another reason why I would want to make that change, which I'll talk about later. We'll leave these cards out laying down, and we can talk more about ratios and stuff like that later, but as I just mentioned, I am playing a 40 card list, which is why I'm playing things at a very strict ratio. For example, only playing 2 Foolish Barrel Goods instead of 3, and only playing and not playing Black Goat Laughs. Okay, so we're going to go on to, of course, the Fiendsmith stuff. I'm still playing Fiendsmith because I think, especially in the current environment where Droll and Lockbird is the most common card in people's main deck and side decks, it's really important to have a way to play through Droll and Lockbird. And the way to do that, is, of course, is to go into Moon of the Closed Heaven, into Requiem, into etc., etc. And I know the engine is expensive and you're tired of seeing Fiendsmith, but it's a really good engine. And of course, I'm playing Sanct, not Tracked, so this makes it even less likely to play into Droll. For example, if you start with discard Engraver to search Sanct, if they Droll you, you can still activate Sanct because it summons a token and it doesn't add a card from deck to hand. So that's the reason I'm playing Sanct. I'm playing the Fiendsmith engine to play around Droll, so I wanted this engine itself to also be able to play around Droll by itself, which is the reason why I'm playing Sanct. And of course, because I'm playing Sanct, it also makes this package a lot cheaper and definitely worth picking up. The reason I'm playing only 2 Engraver and not 3 is because I don't want to play another target for Engraver. Like, I don't want to play a second Sanct, I don't want to play the trap card, because I don't want to have more redundant cards. I want the maximum power with the minimum amount of redundancy, because I want every card to be live in my hand when possible, unless they're super critical and need to be played as a 3 of. The Fiendsmith engine is not super critical because you can get to it via Moon of the Closed Heaven, so I don't need to see this in my hand, which is why I don't need to play the maximum amount. And then that covers basically the engine and the sub-engine, which is the Fiendsmith. And then we're going to go into our non-engine. So the only hand trap I'm playing is Droll and Lockbird. It's the only one that really I want to be playing. The problem I had with playing cards like Fuelos and Perulia is that this deck is a go first deck. And going second, this deck is super weak. And even if I Fuelos and Perulia'd my opponent and they gave me 3 or 4 draws, there's no real combination of cards in this deck that makes it easier to play into a board if they've established the basics, right? Like, with just a little bit of board interruption, like, it's really hard to play through that stuff, especially if it's backed with hand traps. And any deck that wants to take the Charmy challenge can take the Charmy challenge, and I don't really have a great way to play through everything. So that's the reason why I'm only playing Droll, is because Droll can outright just stop the opponent and give them pretty much nothing, which makes it really easy to play through a half board. But for the Charmies, they don't guarantee me to play through a board, which is why I am not main decking them. I am side decking them for when I go second. Okay, so then we're gonna continue on with the rest of the cards. So I am playing 2 Triple Tactics Talents and 2 Triple Tactics Thrusts and 1 Triple Tactics Talents. Only 2 copies of Thrusts for the same reason I'm playing only 2 goods, is because I don't want to overdraw the redundant cards. And of course, Thrust is really only good going second. It's still okay going first in this deck, because whatever you set, you can then use as fodder. And then if it gets added back to your hand, then you can continue to play with that card, because it's a new card. You can then activate it. And then of course Talents, because of course looking at your opponent's hand, going first is really good, drawing 2 is really good. All these effects are really good. I think you should always be playing this card, especially now that it's a 1-of. You should make room. And then of course I'm playing 3 copies of Forbidden Droplet. So this is my other going second card. I still think this card is really strong. It's a bit of an awkward card because you lose a lot of hand size with a lot of your other cards. However, being able to negate stuff on your turn and your opponent's turn is really powerful, especially when you're trying to make a push through a board. Like I said before, this deck struggles pushing through a board, and this card definitely helps a little bit. And the reason why it's Droplet over something like Imperm is because Droplet is a little bit stronger versus playing into a board with multiple bodies, so you can send multiple cards for this card. And also, you know, I'm not ever using Imperm as a hand trap because it's not powerful enough, so I'm always going to be using Imperm as a breaker, and in that case, why not just play Droplet, because it's a better breaker in that regard. And lastly, the one true brick I'm playing in this deck is the Angel Statue, Azurune, and that is a clean 40 cards. And so the only other few things I want to talk about is the reason why I'm not playing the Fiendsmith Trap and additional Fiendsmith cards or the Black Goat Laughs is because I want the minimum amount of like true bricks, and Angel Statue of Azurune is the only true brick. But there is a reason I'm playing this card over a lot of the other cards, mainly because, of course, of Droll. If you get Drolled, because everybody's playing Droll, and of course you're playing White Forest, so people already know that Droll is really strong versus White Forest. You want to be able to make a Fiendsmith stuff and then summon Silhouette Hat Rabbit to get an additional interruption with this Azurune statue. So I guess the other thing to note with Silhouette Rabbit and Azurune statue is that it's a light monster. So even if you go into field spell, you can summon all these things. And we'll talk about extra deck next anyway, so I don't know why I rambled too much about that. So of course we have our Fiendsmith stuff. So I'm playing the minimum number of Fiendsmith cards, which are these 4 cards. This is the minimum amount. I really wish I had room to play Agnum Day. Agnum Day is really strong in this deck because you can use it to get an additional spell and trap card to send. And getting additional spell and trap cards to send is super good in this deck specifically, just because a lot of your cards require spell and trap card costs, and you don't necessarily want to use sequence for that purpose, because you'd rather have the negate plus the protection for Desiree. And then we talked about it briefly, but I'm playing the Silhouette Rabbit for when you get to a board like sequence plus Desiree plus an additional body, you can link away the sequence and the additional body to make Silhouette Rabbit and get an additional interruption. It is a light monster, so it doesn't conflict with the field spell. Okay, and then let's talk about the White Forest cards. Of course, we're playing the Diabelle Queen, the Silvy, the Arciela, the Poplar, the Vengeance Dragon. These are really standard, the 5 main White Forest Synchro monsters. And then, of course, I'm also playing Chaos Angel. Chaos Angel, of course, is super strong because you can make it with the Fiendsmith stuff, and you can make it with a lot of your other combinations of cards as well, just because you'll have like a level 8 with any of these Diabelle monsters and like a level 2 with like Elzette, and that's a level 10, also light monster. You can also make it with a level 4 and a level 6, of course, which we have our level 6s here with the Azamina fusions, a lot of times with Mu Arceolago on the crackback. And of course, you know, we are also playing Moa Regina and a Saint Azamina to round out the Azamina stuff. And we're going to talk more about like secret combinations and packages for the Azamina stuff as well. The reason why I'm playing Saint Azamina is because this is my go-to fusion target most of the time if I can summon it, so that I can summon Ilia Sylvia on my opponent's turn when I am locked into light monsters on my turn, so I can't summon this, so I summon this on my opponent's turn, and then I have an Omni Negate on my opponent's turn. And if you go full combo, then you'll always have that board. So that goes over the main deck and extra deck. I'll go over my side deck as well, just so you can see it. Perhaps there's stuff I would change in the side deck in the future, but for now, I'll show you what I have currently for the current format. Things will, of course, change in the future when the new Justice Hunters set releases. So for the side deck, of course, I have common side deck cards. I have 3 Lancia, I have 3 Mulchamry Fualos, I have 3 Ash Blossom. This Ash Blossom is mostly for going first versus Charmies. I didn't side it in that much because a lot of the times you don't even care about Charmies for this deck because you have a lot of lines if you know your lines. However, it's sometimes nice in some weird matches. It's a little bit better versus Vanquish Soul, because a lot of these other cards are not that great versus Vanquish Soul. Like, none of these cards are that good. Like, Fools is not that good. Lancia is not that good. So Ash is like okay because you can stop them from getting additional names into their hand. I'm playing the 1 Magnum Hut, 1 Druis Worm. these were great for me. Maybe I should have played more, but for having one of each, it was fine. And then, of course, like the standard kind of go second card, Sinful Spoils of Subversion Snake Eye. You're playing a lot of cards that can search Snake Eye cards or Sinful Spoils cards. So this is, of course, a really nice card you can search that can out a card, non-destruction wise, which is really useful in the current environment where there are a lot of sort of protection from destruction cards. And then, of course, for going first, we have Called by the Grave, as well as Deck Devi and Dimensional Barrier. These, of course, are cards that you can Foolish Barrel Goods and reset from Diabell Queen, or you can set them off of Triple Tactics Thrust, and they're both very good in their respective matches. Deck Devi is also decent versus Vanquished Soul, just because you can hit a couple of names out of their hands. It's not like crazy because it doesn't hit a lot of their cards, but if you can hit some, like maybe hit a couple of hand traps, then they'll have a lot less attributes to reveal, which can be helpful, especially when you know their hand because they keep revealing it. So it helps you with that matchup. Obviously, it's for Malice, so you can hit as many names out of their hand as possible. And then D-Barrier, of course, is for all the other decks that need ritual summoning, like Mitsurugi. It's decent into the mirror match. I would not side it into the mirror match, I don't think. It's hard to say whether or not I would. I think maybe I would going first, just so I have like an option to funnel them into either pure Synchro or pure Fusion. I think against the pure variant of White Force, you would definitely side this because they don't have the Fiendsmith stuff, so they're really limited in what they can do. But it's still really nice. Usually you can call like fusions versus them to get them off the Azamina stuff. It really hurts their consistency. However, if they start with Field Spell, then you can call Synchro and they can't really do anything. So that's my side deck. I don't think I would necessarily change anything. I really liked all of these cards in my side deck. I think maybe the Ash Blossom could be swapped with Perulia, but I don't have Perulia because, you know, I haven't been playing the game in a long time and I just don't have those cards. So that covers basically the main and extra deck. So let's talk about secret effects and the like. Okay, so for this part of the video, I want to talk about things you should remember, things you need to know playing this deck. So the first card I want to talk about is Sinful Spoils of Slumber Morrian. A lot of people still miss this card, miss this card's effect that I think is very important. So let's say you have a board, a typical board of something like all of your Diabell monsters, plus a Morrian set. Let's see if I can get Vengeance out here too. Something like this, right? And your opponent maybe starts their turn with Imperm, target Diabell, Queen of the White Forests. So you don't have to chain to this card right away. You could wait. You can say, yes, Imperm resolves, and then later in the turn when they have established more monsters and they've activated effect, you can go Diabell Star Effect Chainlink 2. They'll go, okay, it resolves without effect. You go, do you have anything else to add to this chain? They say no. You go Chainlink 3 Morrian, target your own Diabell Queen. The chain will resolve backwards, so Morrian will set this card face down. And because it is set face down, it no longer remembers any of the lingering effect negation effects. So then Chainlink 2 will resolve, sending in another spell and trap card in order to summon a Synchro monster from your extra deck. A tuner Synchro monster, so you can summon Silvera here. Silvera will now Book of Eclipse your entire opponent's board. So maybe if your opponent is like not thinking about this combination and they basically played thinking you won't have access to the Book of Eclipse, this is one way to really punish them. It can, you know, really do a lot of damage. So that is one really important thing to note. I think it's one of the biggest reasons why you should be playing this card, Morrian, because it basically just makes it so that your end board is really hard to deal with and it forcibly is able to activate a lot of effects. Same thing, of course, with the Vengeance. If the Vengeance is on the field, they start with Imperm Vengeance. You can still later on in the turn go Vengeance, effect to pop a card, Chainlink to Morrian to book it, and then this will resolve with effects because it forgets the effect negation that was lingering on it, so it will pop a card and then also summon a tuner Synchro monster from your extra deck, which can be really backbreaking. So between that and, for example, a Popular. So those are some of the important things to note with Morrian. The other thing to note with Morrian is it's a Sinful Spoils card, so if it gets banished by its own effect, you can later on activate the effect of Wanted to shuffle it back into your deck and draw one card. It also puts it back into rotation, so this card will always get back into rotation. So it is a trap card you can pretty much always search in order to then banish it to re-summon a Vengeance from the graveyard, so it's really good follow-up in that regard. The next thing I want to talk about is of course, the secret effect of White Witch, which is it protects your monsters, all monsters from destruction, not just your White Forest monsters. So that is something important to note. The other thing I want to talk about is Angel Statue of Azurune. So I'm playing this card to play around Droll, but it has a lot of other really cool applications as well. First of all, besides Silhouette Rabbit being a light monster, so you can always have access to these cards, regardless of whether you use the field spell or not. The other thing is that Azurune Statue is always treated as a trap card, even when it's summoned to the field as a monster, which means if you have a field of Azurune Statue plus Queen, let's say you summon the Azurune Statue, and it's a really good interruption against a lot of decks, but not always. So for example, against like pure Mitsurugi, this card pretty much does almost nothing against Mitsurugi. So instead, you can really catch your opponent off guard is by using Diabell effect to send the Azurune Statue, because it is treated as a spell trap card still while it's in the monster zone for the cost of this card, and then summon a Silvera, which will Book of Eclipse your opponent's board, so that can also be a really surprise factor. It's an important thing to note with these types of cards is that it makes your opponent play weird because they think things work in a certain way, or perhaps you see this board and I have no other spell and trap cards, and they think, okay, so Diabell has no other spell and trap cards to send, so I'm pretty safe playing a little bit more recklessly into these cards, and then you hit them with the send Azurine Statue, summon a Silvera, and it can be backbreaking for your opponent. So that is the second thing I want to talk about with this card. Additional thing is the good thing about playing this card, and the main reason I play this card, the main reason I play this card is because it helps get an interruption through Droll and Lockbird, but the second bonus with this card, apart from what I just talked about with the Diabell Queen, is that this is a trap card interruption that is guaranteed to be in your graveyard after you use it, which means on the follow-up turn you can use it as the trap card to banish for this Diabell Star Vengeance. It is also a way on your turn, if you don't have access to a trap card, you could summon the Silhouette Rabbit on your turn to get this card to the field, and then send it as a cost for one of the other cards to get a trap card in your graveyard, once again for this Vengeance. So it is a secondary searchable trap card in your deck, and it's way easier to search this card when you have like hand traps, for example, that don't do anything. You can still make a Silhouette Rabbit to search this trap card, whereas a lot of the other cards require more specific things, like the Curse of Diabell is only searchable with White Witch, and Sinful Spoils of Slumber Morrian is only searchable via Diabell Star the Black Witch or through the Mu Arceolago. The Mu Arceolago is also awkward because if you're locked out of Dark Monsters, then that's another card you can't use to search the Sinful Spoils of Slumber Morrian. So it's an additional redundancy for trap cards, and I only play these three. And the reason why it's important that it's Azurine Statue is because if I were playing the bigger Fiendsmith package with Fiendsmith and Paradise, Fiendsmith Paradise is kind of like a searchable trap card, but most of the time you want to use Paradise as an interruption to send Desiree to the graveyard to send a card from field to the graveyard, whereas this card is an interruption and follow-up for your Vengeance, as opposed to Paradise, which is only an interruption. It can't be used for Vengeance follow-up. It can be used for, I guess, Fiendsmith follow-up, but it's more important to get your White Forest follow-up instead. So that is the next important thing I want people to know. For this next thing, I mentioned this in my combo video, but in some weird scenarios, if you get hand trapped a lot, you can still summon back Silvy from the graveyard, for example. And Silvy is a tuner monster, and Lacrima the Crimson Tear, which is also super searchable, is a non-tuner monster. This makes level 8, so you can use it to Synchro summon into Diabell Queen. So Diabell Queen is a generic level 8. You can make it with any 2 monsters, It has a bonus effect if you use a Tuner Sinker monster to add back a spell and trap card from the graveyard. However, you can still summon it, and it's still an interruption. It's a really strong interruption to summon a Book of Clips. So that is an important thing to remember with these combination of cards, is you can still hard Synchro summon into Diabell Queen. You don't get back a spell and trap card, but sometimes just having this on your end board is super nice to have. And if you've watched my combo video, then you probably already know this line, but for those of you who don't, this is a really an important interaction to know. Lacrima can equip any spell or trap card, Fiendsmith spell trap card, to your... I'm like tripping over my words, but you can use Requiem Engraver to attach the Lacrima, and you can then use Lacrima as a spell and trap card to send for the cost of your cards. That one is pretty obvious. If you're playing the Fiendsmith package, you probably already know that, but just in case you don't know, that's an important thing to know. You can also use it for the cost of other cards like the Abyss or the Black Witch, for example. Next thing I want to talk about is sort of like more of a combo. If you get hand trapped a lot, you may be in a scenario where you can have only the access to the Fiendsmith stuff, right? But maybe you've also managed to search Elzette Azamina. There's a lot of scenarios where this might happen. So you end on this sort of board or hand or whatever. Like you've access to Engraver via some method, like Moon of the Close Heaven, or by having it, and you've managed to search Elzette. So Elzette can also fusion summon. Its effect is it can fusion summon on the field or hand. So you have your Elzette Azamina, which is an illusion monster, and Fiendsmith Engraver, which is a level 6 or higher fiend. So that allows you to fusion summon into Moa Regina, and Moa Regina has an effect to summon back a illusion monster from your graveyard, so you can summon back the Elzette Azamina, and now you have a level 8 dark monster and a level 2 light monster, and you can actually synchro summon this into the level 10 Chaos Angel. And Chaos Angel is a synchro monster, so that will still trigger the effect of Elzette Azamina to search for a Sinful Spells spell or trap card. So here you can search now for the Deception, for example, or the Wanted, or whatever you want to search for that is a Sinful Spells. So that is just like an important interaction to know for this combo. If you are a Illusion Chimera player, you probably already know this interaction, but for our White Forest players who are playing Fiendsmith White Forest, maybe you didn't know this interaction, and it's another reason why I'm playing these cards in my extra deck. And the next thing I want to talk about is Silhouette Rabbit is a illusion monster, so sometimes that is really important when you have a weird board and you have the fusion spell, but you don't necessarily have another way to get a good illusion monster. Like, let's say you only have one light spellcaster like Silvy, you've summoned it and they've negated it, you then go Fiendsmith combo, and then you end on like the Silhouette Rabbit, and maybe you've hard drawn the fusion spell, for example. The important thing to note here is that this is a light spellcaster and this is an illusion monster, so you can then synchro these cards together to make an Ilia Sylvia on your opponent's turn, because Ilia Sylvia, of course, requires an illusion monster and a light spellcaster. You can also fusion, of course, into Mu Arceolago, but Mu Arceolago doesn't necessarily give you an interruption on your opponent's turn. The other thing to note too is, of course, like maybe you'll be in a state where like you have like a Veiler in your hand, like Effect Veiler, or you activated Elzette of the White Forest in your hands and it got Ash Blossomed, so maybe this is still in your hand, for example. So that's just like another thing to note, like this is in your hand but it's still a light spellcaster, so if you can make an illusion monster on your field, you can then use it as fusion material for the Sinful Spells of the White Forest, because it can be used on the field or hand. You need to control a fiend, illusion, or spellcaster monster to activate that, so that's another reason why you can summon Silhouette Rabbit, because it's an illusion monster which will allow you to activate this card. So those are another important thing to note. What else can I talk about? For Moa Regina specifically, It has an effect where if you activated a Sinful Spoils card, you can chain link 2 or chain to that effect to pop 2 additional cards in the field. This one people already probably know from watching other content, but Diabell's Vengeance is a Sinful Spoils card. It's always treated as one. So if you activate Vengeance to pop a card, you can then chain Moa Regina to pop 2 additional cards. That is just something really important to note. I think I've already talked about it before, but once again, Diabell protects your monsters from destruction when you control another Diabell monster. The other thing to note, which people always forget, I think people usually remember that Silvera does double piercing damage for any of your illusion or spellcaster synchro monsters. So that includes all these other cards too. So if you have like all 3 of these on the board, that's like a lot of double piercing damage. So in weird game states, you can just summon all 3 of these and it'll be game a lot of the times because you'll book of a flip to your opponent's board and then all these do double piercing damage. So that's a lot of damage. And both of these also give 500 attack. So all 3 of these monsters are at plus 1000. Okay. So that is another important thing to note. So this will be at 35, this will be at 3000, and this will be at 29. So it's like 3 really big monsters that do double piercing battle damage. And like for example, there's a Nib that only has 600 defense. You can just walk over it with this card and deal like almost 4000 damage. It's kind of crazy, but these are things you should know. And the other secret effect that people always forget is that this card prevents your Synchro, Spellcaster, and Illusion monsters from destruction. So it has a very similar effect to the Diabell's the White Witch, where it protects cards from destruction. It only protects your Synchro monsters, but if you have these boards, like these 3, for example, none of these cards can be destroyed by card effects. So that is another really important thing to note. Whereas if you're playing against a deck that you know has a lot of destruction removal, you can try to access this card first to protect your cards from destruction. It also makes it so that if they try to Ghost Ogre you, this also protects against Ghost Ogre. Just one of the important things to know that people always forget. Like, you should remember the destruction protection effects for your cards because there's just a lot of destruction in the game right now. So it's really nice to remember cards like Rusia, which have that effect. And I think that mostly covers all the stuff that I want people to remember, like important things to remember. I'm trying to think if there's anything else really notable. I guess Wanted can search for a Diabell Star monster. So you can search for Diabell Star Vengeance with Wanted. So that's really important. Philia Diabell can summon to the field if only your opponent controls a monster. This is important for going second into a board. So don't like summon monsters before you activate this card, because then you add it to hand, which can be okay as well. But you know, obviously summoning to the field is a lot nicer a lot of the times. And I guess the other thing to note is important thing with Sanct. If you're playing Sanct in this deck, it is really important to know that this card requires you to only control Light Fiends or no monsters. So if you have Engraver in your opening hand, you are sort of forced to start with Engraver, which may or may not be what you want, but that is, you know, something you should consider when playing the Sanct package. You can't use Sanct unless your board is empty, so make sure your board is empty. And then I guess other things to note, Sinful Spoils of the White Force is a quick play spell, so if you have it in your hand, you can also use it to fuse on your own turn. This can be useful to dodge effect negation as well, or to push through some plays that are in weird game states. And also, because it's a quick play, you can also use it in the battle phase to fusion summon into something for more damage. And it has an additional effect, obviously, of course, which allows you to special summon a Fiend, Illusion, or Spellcaster from your hand. That is also sometimes comes up. And then the last thing, which people forget, is that Elzette Azamina the White Forest, when you activate its effect to summon, it can summon any White Forest monster from your hand. It doesn't have to be itself. So if you're in a game state, for example, where you've sort of like started with a stellar, right? And your stellar gets negated, and then you go Elzette, for example. And if you normally you would search the Elzette Azamina to continue playing, but let's say you also already have this in hand, or you can search it with Deception or something like that, then you can add the Silvy of the White Forest to your hand instead. And from here, you can activate Elzette Azamina to summon, and you can summon the Silvy here instead. So, like, because of this board, if it gets negated, you're left with two sort of like non-tuner level 2 monsters, and the best you can do with this is Fiendsmith combo. But if you have access to this card, you can then summon it to the field, and now you can fusion, not fusion, synchro summon, and you can keep playing. Obviously, like, this means you won't have access to the Azamina stuff, but usually that's fine in a lot of game states, because you would rather have your full White Forest cards established than the Azamina stuff a lot of the time. Especially if you're dark locked, then the Azamina stuff doesn't matter at all. So it's really important to know that when you're dark locked or don't have access to the Azamina cards, to utilize this card, Elzette Azamina, to its maximum potential. It's like one of the strongest cards, and I've already talked about like 3 different ways you can use this card that are uncommon, that you should know if you are playing White Forest. Trying to think if there's anything super notable to note otherwise. If you're playing Drone, Lockbird, or Effect Veiler, these are also spellcaster monsters, so you can use them to get a search off of Tales of the White Forest, for example, which is a weird case, but you know, sometimes it comes up. And Tales of the White Forest requires you to control any illusion or spellcaster monster. So once again, another reason to play Silhouette Rabbit. If you don't have access to, let's say your hand is just Fiendsmith cards and Tails, you can use the Fiendsmith cards to go into Silhouette Rabbit, and then Silhouette Rabbit can then add your starter, for example Silvy, and now you can go full combo, and it's, you know, it's really strong, of course. And then obviously the downside is your Silhouette Rabbit can't be used as link material on the turn it's summoned, but you're fine at that point. It just may clog up a little bit of space, but then you can later link away your other cards to make sequence down here somewhere, because you can always make Moon. Moon is not once per turn to summon, so if you shuffle it back with Engraver, you can summon it again to then go into Fiendsmith sequence to make Desiree. So those are just like a bunch of random important things to note. Hopefully that was helpful in your journey to play White Forest. And if there's stuff I've missed or more stuff that you want me to talk about in the future, feel free to leave a comment and I'll try to get back to it as soon as I can.